I had always prided myself on being a man of logic rooted in the tangible world. My friend Joe and I spent countless weekends out on the frozen lakes of northern Ontario, braving harsh winters in search of fish and camaraderie. That particular weekend had started as usual. Our SUV packed with rods, bait, and enough beer to numb the northern chill. The catch had been excellent, and our spirits were high as we loaded the vehicle with enough walleye and smallmouth bass to last us weeks. We had no idea that this trip would forever alter our understanding of the world. The drive back to Kapuskasing was daunting. Snow had fallen incessantly, burying everything under a thick, suffocating blanket of white. I'd lived in northern Ontario my entire life and seen some brutal winters, but this was a beast of its own. Snowbanks towered like cliffs on either side of the road, and the unyielding cold seemed to seep into the very core of existence. As we approached a steep incline, the tranquility of the landscape was shattered by the sight of 2 police helicopters landing directly on the highway ahead. A small stream of cars crawled to a stop, forming a line of glowing red taillights. Joe cursed under his breath. "This isn't good," he muttered. He was right. The roadblock wasn't your everyday inconvenience. Later, we learned that a tragic accident had claimed the lives of a newlywed couple, their vehicle reduced to a mangled shell beneath the weight of a transport truck. The road ahead was closed indefinitely, and turning back was our only option. With no other choice, we headed back the way we came, descending into a tiny hamlet that seemed frozen in both time and temperature. The hamlet was surreal, its war-era houses submerged in snow so deep only their rooftops peeked out like the tops of buried giants. There was a single stop sign, a gas station that doubled as a motel and restaurant, and little else. Joe, impatient as ever, was determined to find another way home. His wife and kids were waiting, and he wasn't the type to idle for 12 hours waiting for the road to clear. I could see the gleam in his eye, the same look he got whenever he was about to do something reckless. "Hang tight," Joe said, "and hold on." He turned the wheel sharply, guiding the SUV onto a narrow trail that had been carved out for snowmobiles. The so-called road was flanked by snowbanks so high they blocked out the sun, casting us in a perpetual twilight. The stop signs along the trail barely reached 3 feet, a stark reminder of just how deeply buried we were. The farther we went, the worse the road became. I gripped the armrest tightly, my knuckles turning white. "Are you sure this is safe?" I asked, my voice quivering despite my efforts to sound calm. Joe ignored me, his focus locked on the treacherous path ahead. The glare of the setting sun bounced off the snow, nearly blinding us. For 15 minutes we bumped and jostled our way down the icy trail, the oppressive silence broken only by the crunch of tires against the frozen ground. A growing unease settled in my chest. This was how people ended up on the evening news, lost, frozen, and forgotten. Finally, Joe brought the SUV to a halt. The engine's hum faded, leaving an eerie silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "What's up?" I asked, my breath fogging in the frigid air. Joe squinted into the distance, his eyes narrowing. "There's something up ahead," he said, pointing. "Looks like another road." I followed his gaze and saw it. A narrow path cutting through the snowbanks. Unlike the trail we were on, this road was unmarked, its edges blurred by fresh snowfall. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn back, but Joe had already made up his mind. With a determined twist of the wheel, he guided the SUV onto the uncharted path. The new road was worse than the last, its surface slick with hidden patches of ice. As the vehicle crawled forward, an overwhelming sense of dread swept over me. The road seemed to narrow with every passing minute, the encroaching darkness of the forest swallowing us whole. The GPS on Joe's phone was useless. We were off the grid, left to navigate by sheer instinct. "Keep an eye out," Joe said, his voice strained. "I don't like the look of this." Neither did I. The trees on either side of the road loomed like sentinels, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. The setting sun cast long shadows across the snow, and the temperature seemed to plummet with every passing second. Then Joe slammed on the brakes. "You see that?" he asked, pointing into the forest. At first I saw nothing but a wall of trees. Then I spotted it, a faint, flickering light deep in the woods. A fire burning low and wild, its flames dancing in shades of blue and orange. Before I could comment, a bone-chilling sound shattered the silence. It was a howl, but not like any I'd ever heard. It was long and mournful, carrying an almost human quality that made my blood run cold. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the thundering of my heart. Joe didn't answer. He was staring into the forest, his face pale. The howl came again, this time closer. The sound was both haunting and unnatural, like the lament of a tortured soul. Then, out of the darkness, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared. Joe killed the headlights and whispered, "Don't move." The eyes moved closer, gliding through the forest with an unnerving grace. My pulse quickened as I struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. The eyes were bright and unblinking, like twin embers burning in the dark. A low growl rumbled through the air, vibrating deep in my chest. "Reach for the gun," Joe whispered. The shotgun was in the back seat, tantalizingly out of reach. Before I could move, the creature lunged. Its massive frame landed on the hood of the SUV, denting the metal with a deafening crash. Joe and I screamed in unison, the sound echoing through the forest. The thing was enormous, its wolf-like features twisted in a grotesque snarl. It stood on two legs, its gangly arms ending in claws that gleamed like daggers. Saliva dripped from its gaping maw, its yellowed teeth bared in a predatory grin. "Dog man," Joe muttered, his voice trembling. "I don't believe it." The creature let out a blood-curdling roar, its breath steaming in the frigid air. Joe slammed his foot on the gas, but the tires spun helplessly on the ice. The beast pounded on the windshield, its claws shattering the glass into 1,000 glittering shards. I barely had time to shield my face before it turned its attention to the passenger door, its claws tearing through metal as if it were paper. The dogman's glowing red eyes locked onto mine, and I was paralyzed with fear. It raised one clawed hand. Its long, sinewy fingers curled into a grotesque approximation of a human gesture and slashed at the door. Metal screeched and buckled, the sound reverberating in my skull. Joe was frantically trying to force the vehicle into motion, his hands trembling as he twisted the wheel back and forth. But the tires were useless on the ice. The beast's claw came again, and the passenger door ripped free, its hinges snapping like brittle twigs. I turned my head away, bracing for the inevitable. I could feel its hot breath on my face, reeking of decay and raw meat. It leaned closer, its jaws snapping mere inches from my neck. I could see the saliva glistening on its jagged teeth, could hear the deep rumble of its growls as it prepared to strike. Suddenly, the SUV rocked violently. The creature had leapt off the door and bounded to the rear, drawn by the smell of fish spilling from the cooler. In an instant, it began devouring our catch, its muzzle buried in the pile of walleye and smallmouth bass. Joe and I exchanged a terrified glance, each of us frozen in disbelief. "Now's our chance," Joe hissed, his voice barely audible over the sound of the creature's feeding frenzy. We scrambled into the back of the SUV, carefully maneuvering around the shards of glass and spilled fish guts. Joe grabbed the shotgun, its cold metal barrel glinting faintly in the moonlight. I could see his hands trembling as he loaded the weapon, his breaths coming in shallow, rapid bursts. The dogman paused its feast, lifting its blood-smeared muzzle to sniff the air. It turned its head toward us, its glowing eyes narrowing in calculated malice. "Stay back!" Joe shouted, his voice cracking. The beast snarled in response, a guttural sound that seemed to vibrate the very ground beneath us. It lunged, its claws slicing through the air. Joe fired, the shotgun's deafening blast lighting up the interior of the SUV like a strobe. The creature howled in pain as the shot tore into its shoulder, a spray of blood painting the snow in dark, crimson streaks. But it didn't retreat. Instead, it seemed to grow even more enraged. Joe fired again, this time hitting the beast square in the chest. The impact sent it staggering backward, but it recovered almost immediately, its snarls turning into an ear-piercing roar. Blood dripped from its wounds, steaming as it hit the frozen ground. For a moment I thought it was over, that the dogman would collapse and die. But it didn't. Instead, it lunged forward once more, faster and angrier than before. Just when I thought we were finished, another shot rang out. This one didn't come from Joe's gun. A figure emerged from the darkness, a tall man with a weathered face and fiery red hair. He carried a sniper rifle, its barrel still smoking from the recent shot. The dogman froze, its glowing eyes fixed on the stranger. The man fired again, and this time the bullet struck the creature's flank, sending it howling into the woods. "Get out of the car," the man barked, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for argument. Joe and I didn't hesitate. We stumbled out into the freezing night, the bitter wind biting at our exposed skin. The man motioned for us to follow him to a nearby Volkswagen microbus, its engine rumbling softly. Inside, the vehicle was a bizarre arsenal of weapons and equipment. There were rifles, knives, and even a crossbow mounted on the walls, each piece meticulously maintained. The man introduced himself as Patrick, a self-proclaimed dogman hunter. He explained that he had been tracking this particular creature for weeks, following its trail of mutilated animals and eerie howls. According to Patrick, the dogman was a cunning predator, capable of outsmarting even the most experienced hunters. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, his piercing gaze fixed on me. "Most people don't walk away from an encounter like that." Patrick drove us to his secluded cabin, a small but sturdy structure nestled deep in the woods. The interior was surprisingly cozy, with a roaring fire in the hearth and a collection of old hunting trophies adorning the walls. He offered us steaming mugs of coffee, which we accepted gratefully, our hands still shaking from the ordeal. Over the next several hours, Patrick regaled us with tales of his hunts. He claimed to have encountered dogmen multiple times, even wounding a few, but he admitted that he had never managed to kill one. "They're fast," he explained, "and smart. Smarter than any animal has a right to be. Killing one is no easy task." Joe listened intently, his fascination with the dogman growing by the minute. I, on the other hand, felt a deep sense of unease. The last thing I wanted was to cross paths with that creature, or any other like it ever again. Yet despite my reservations, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much larger. The next morning, Patrick drove us back to the SUV. The sight that greeted us was both shocking and disheartening. The vehicle was completely destroyed, its doors ripped off, its interior gutted. Blood and fur littered the snow around it, evidence of the previous night's chaos. It was clear that the dogman had returned after we'd fled, its rage unleashed on the helpless vehicle. "This isn't right," Patrick muttered, his eyes scanning the surrounding forest. "It's never been this aggressive before." We searched the area for tracks, but a fresh layer of snow had fallen overnight, erasing any evidence of the creature's movements. Defeated, we climbed into Patrick's microbus and began the long drive back to town. Joe and I were silent, each lost in our thoughts. The events of the past 24 hours had shaken us to our core. As we parted ways with Patrick, he handed Joe a business card. "If you ever want to hunt it down, let me know," he said. "These things don't belong in our world." Joe nodded, a glint of determination in his eyes. I felt a pang of dread. The idea of hunting a dogman was madness, pure and simple. But Joe had never been one to back down from a challenge. In the weeks that followed, the memory of the encounter haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing red eyes, felt the hot breath of the beast on my face. Joe, however, seemed energized by the experience. He spoke often of forming a team, of joining Patrick in his quest to rid the wilderness of these creatures. I couldn't understand his enthusiasm. To me, the lesson was clear. Some roads are best left untraveled, especially in the frozen wilderness of northern Ontario, where the unknown lurks just beyond the edge of the forest. The town of Blackfeather was no stranger to the occasional disappearance. People wandered into the forest and simply didn't return. Most of the time, it was drifters or the careless, their fates sealed by the sheer unforgiving wilderness. But this time was different. 2 townsfolk people we knew, people with homes and families, vanished within a single week. The first body was found off South Slope Road, or what was left of it. It was more a collection of parts than a person, the remains savaged beyond recognition. Even the coroner, a grizzled man who'd seen it all, could only shake his head, too horrified to guess which of the missing it might be. The second person hadn't been found. But with the growing number of reports, those half-human, half-wolf screams echoing from the forest, it was clear we weren't going to find them alive. Whatever had taken them wasn't finished. Sinclair, our self-proclaimed local expert on the arcane and monstrous, was quick to proclaim that it was the work of a lycanthrope or some other nightmarish predator. I wasn't sure what to believe, but Sinclair had clout in this town, and his whispers reached command. Orders came swiftly, bypassing debate. 3 ranger teams were to take up arms and head into the forest at dawn. We were to flush the creature out and end its reign of terror. Capture was preferred. Termination was permitted. The plan was as follows. The night crawlers, my squad, would take the western flank of the valley. The headless men would hold the eastern side, and the Ironside's heavy hitters, armed with enough firepower to raise a small town, would barrel up the center. Together we'd trap the creature against the Lay River. But in my gut I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The night before our departure, Sinclair sent a lavish meal and fine wine to the ranger barracks. I couldn't bring myself to enjoy it. The heavy weight of the mission crushed any semblance of camaraderie that usually accompanied such gestures. As I lay in my bunk that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something far worse than we could handle.